was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity.
At exactly 3 minutes ago in the Royal Privy Council chamber, an act no one expected unfolded inside the heart of monarchy authority. Princess Anne stepped forward as official documents were laid out for approval, and in a moment that stunned senior advisors, she physically blocked the proposed changes to the King's Privy Council protocol. Not with anger alone, but with absolute constitutional certainty. What followed wasn't discussion. It was silence so heavy, it reshaped the room. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles felt the weight of every gaze in the room the moment Anne stepped forward. No one moved. Not even the advisors who had spent weeks shaping the language of reform. The Privy Council chamber, the sovereign, formal body of senior advisors guiding state decisions, suddenly felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were listening. This meeting had been called to modernize how decisions flowed through the monarchy, a shift meant to speed up approvals and reduce institutional delay. But in that same plan, something deeper was at stake. The balance of influence that had defined royal governance for generations. Anne did not flinch as she stood near the center of the chamber. She had arrived knowing exactly what this revision meant, not just for structure, but for authority itself. Charles had authorized the review to streamline decision-making across senior advisory bodies, believing it would strengthen long-term stability. Yet the more efficient the system became, the more it risked weakening the traditional safeguards that had always slowed power when caution was needed most. Around them, advisors felt torn in two directions: loyalty to the Crown's vision of modernization, and unease about what might be quietly erased in the process. The sealed document resting on the table told its own silent story. Inside it were amendments that had not passed through full council circulation, changes that would reduce Anne's long-standing advisory oversight and redirect influence toward newly appointed palace officials with closer administrative ties to current reform teams. It was presented as efficiency, but it carried a hidden consequence: a quiet restructuring of who could challenge decisions before they reached the king's. The final approval. Anne understood that implication immediately, the moment she read the first page during earlier private review. Tension sharpened when the final moment arrived. Charles reached for the pen, ready to authorize the protocol shift. A formal act that would confirm the Privy Council's revised decision-making framework. Think, structured system, defining how royal advisors review and approve state matters before the monarch signs them into effect. The chamber held its breath as ink hovered above paper. Every advisor expected closure, not confrontation. Anne moved before the pen touched the document. She stepped directly between the king and the table, her hand pressing firmly against the doored, polished wood, as she stated that the protocol revision could not proceed under constitutional precedent. Her voice did not rise, but it cut through the room with certainty that left no space for interruption. Charles stopped instantly, his expression tightening as the reality of the moment settled in. Anne remained standing in place, every muscle controlled, every breath measured. She was calm, but the stillness in her eyes carried something heavier than defiance. It carried responsibility. Charles slowly lowered the pen, not in defeat, but in recognition that what stood before him was not personal resistance, but institutional warning. Advisors looked away, unable to hold the moment for long. But what brought a royal princess to defy a decision already placed before the crown begins long before this moment, inside conversations the palace never intended to surface. Behind every royal decision stands not just authority, but people carrying invisible pressure that never leaves the room. In the hours leading to the Privy Council confrontation, Princess Anne was not alone in her concern. King Charles wrestled with institutional modernization he believed necessary for survival. Advisors whispered of structural reform, and within those shifting loyalties, emotional fractures formed that no official record would ever fully capture. Charles felt the strain long before the chamber doors ever closed. The Privy Council, the sovereign, Anne's senior advisory body guiding official state decisions, had become, in his view, too slow for a monarchy trying to survive a modern world. He believed restructuring advisory influence would streamline decision-making across senior councils, reducing delay and restoring clarity. But that vision carried a cost he could feel even in silence. The slow erosion of the old safeguards that had always protected royal judgment from rushing too fast. Anne carried a different kind of weight. She believed the reforms would weaken the historical accountability embedded in the council's structure, the very restraint that kept decisions grounded before they reached the monarch. She did not oppose change itself. She opposed speed without reflection. And that difference turned every conversation into something sharper than disagreement. Charles, meanwhile, carried quiet frustration, convinced that resistance would trap the institution in outdated cycles when survival demanded movement. The tension had already been building in shadows long before the meeting. A private briefing circulated days earlier suggesting Anne might oppose the changes in formal session, not through emotional reaction, but through procedural challenge inside the chamber itself. Advisors privately debated whether her opposition would escalate into a constitutional challenge, a moment where disagreement could shift from discussion to institutional fracture. Even the tone of those conversations changed, less speculative, more cautious, as if the outcome was already beginning to take shape. Then came the smallest act that shifted everything. One senior clerk was seen removing Anne's annotated objections from the briefing folder before the meeting began, sliding the marked pages out with controlled urgency. Those notes contained her structured concerns about the protocol revision, the quiet warnings she had prepared for the chamber. Their removal didn't erase her position, but it changed the temperature of the room before she even entered it. Inside his private study, Charles sat alone reviewing the protocol file. The document outlined the restructuring of advisory authority within the Privy Council, the formal system through which senior advisors shape decisions before the king's final approval. He paused mid-page, eyes fixed, reading not just words, but implications. After a long silence, he slowly closed the file without speaking, as if acknowledging that whatever came next could not be solved on paper alone. Outside the chamber, Anne stood in the corridor, steady but distant, exhaling slowly as she prepared for a confrontation she already knew could not be avoided. Every step ahead felt heavier, not because she doubted herself, but because she understood what standing her ground would mean inside a system built on balance, restraint, and unspoken boundaries. Yet none of this tension began in that corridor. It was born in a single private royal engagement, where everything first shifted. Camilla felt the room shift long before anyone spoke too loudly. The Windsor dinner carried a calm that was carefully built, not naturally present, as if every smile was rehearsed to hide the weight underneath. Charles moved through the conversation with controlled ease, believing that bringing to discussion into an informal setting would soften resistance to what was coming. The monarchy had been exploring internal restructuring for months, a quiet effort to manage increasing administrative complexity across its advisory system. It was meant to feel natural. It did not, or noticed it differently. She sat still, watching how decisions were being shaped without the full structure of formal consultation. The confidential advisory dinner, a private gathering where senior figures discussed direction before official council sessions, was supposed to create unity before structure. Instead, it created distance. She felt it in the pauses, in the way certain names were spoken, and in how influence seemed to gather around ideas that had never been properly tested through the Privy Council itself. She did not interrupt, but she did not relax either. Charles believed the informality would reduce resistance. He thought unity came from conversation, not procedure. That belief guided the entire evening. He wanted modernization to feel shared, not imposed. But what he underestimated was how deeply tradition lives inside those who have carried it the longest. Anne did not see resistance as opposition. She saw it as protection. And as the evening unfolded, that difference began to separate them more than any spoken disagreement ever could. The moment changed quietly, almost unnoticed by everyone except her. A draft amendment moved across the table during a lull in conversation, passed casually, between advisors without official labeling or Privy Council identification. The Privy Council, the sovereign's formal body of senior advisors responsible for reviewing and approving state decisions before they reach the monarch, was not supposed to be bypassed, even in discussion. But here, in the softness of a private dinner, that structure was blurred. The document looked harmless at first glance. It was not. Anne read it once. Then again, her expression did not change quickly, but something inside her tightened with each line. The draft reduced long-standing advisory protections she had spent years defending, shifting influence toward newly defined roles that had never been fully discussed at council level. It was framed as efficiency, but efficiency in that moment looked like quiet erosion of balance. Charles continued speaking, unaware of how still she had become. The conversation around her carried on, glasses lifted, voices overlapping gently. Camilla spoke softly with another advisor, unaware of the internal break forming at the table. Anne stayed motionless, listening without reacting, but thinking faster than the room could see. She understood what this meant, not as a single change, but as a direction. And directions, once set, rarely reverse without conflict. By the time the dinner began to dissolve into polite endings, the decision had already formed inside her, not spoken, not shared, but fully present. She had seen enough to know silence would no longer protect what she believed the council must remain. Charles thought the evening had brought alignment. Anne understood it had created fracture. And when the final glasses were cleared and chairs began to shift, she made a choice no one witnessed in the moment itself. Anne kept a copy of the draft after the dinner ended, without informing anyone she had done so. That was the line the monarchy did not see being crossed. At the Windsor dinner table, Anne sat for a moment longer than anyone else, the document folded carefully into her folder as conversation faded around her. Her expression tightened, not with anger, but with clarity that felt heavier than emotion. The room continued to move, but she no longer moved with it in the same way. Camilla left the table unaware of what had changed behind her. Charles remained engaged in final courtesies, believing the evening had served its purpose. But Anne sat motionless, surrounded by soft conversation she no longer fully belonged to, deciding something quietly and completely. Silence was no longer an option that would hold. And that quiet decision, made in a room designed for harmony, would later resurface not in neck whispers, but in a direct confrontation inside the most formal chamber of royal authority. Inside the Privy Council chamber, formality usually silences conflict before it begins. But on this day, silence broke. As King Charles prepared to finalize the protocol revisions, Princess Anne stepped forward, not as a challenger to the crown, but as its constitutional conscience. The room did not erupt. Instead, it froze. Every advisor understood instantly that what was about to happen was not disagreement, it was a defining fracture in royal decision-making authority. Charles felt the pressure tighten in his chest as every pair of eyes shifted without movement. The council meeting had been scheduled as a routine approval session for administrative modernization, a controlled step designed to refine how senior advisors shape decisions before reaching the monarch's final authority. The Privy Council, the sovereign's formal advisory body responsible for reviewing and confirming state decisions, had already received the protocol revisions in advance, all expected to pass without disruption. That expectation now collapsed in real time. Anne did not rush. She never needed to. She stood with quiet certainty, aware that Charles felt betrayed not just by resistance, but by resistance arriving at the final stage of approval when everything was supposed to align. He believed the revisions would strengthen efficiency across royal governance. She believed they would tilt the balance too far, weakening the institutional safeguards that kept power accountable before it became irreversible. That difference was no longer theoretical. It was now standing in the middle of the chamber. Anne's voice cut through the stillness as she revealed she had documented concerns about constitutional overreach in the proposed amendments. The concern was not emotional. it was procedural. She referenced written objections she had prepared through internal review, outlining how the changes risked concentrating advisory influence without sufficient council scrutiny. Advisors shifted in their seats, realizing this was no longer a ceremonial approval. It was turning into a constitutional standoff unfolding in real time. Charles felt something harder than disagreement. He felt interruption at the point of completion. Yet Anne did not move from principle, even as she understood the personal cost of standing in direct opposition during a formal council session. Around them, advisors realized the structure of the meeting had collapsed. What was meant to be a formality now carried weight that could not be reversed by procedure alone. Every glance dropped to the table. No one wanted to become the next voice in a moment that no longer had a clear direction. The tension sharpened when Charles reached for the final approval seal, the official instrument used to confirm council decisions before implementation. That seal represented the final procedural step, binding the protocol revisions into royal governance. His hand moved with controlled intent, but it never reached completion. Anne moved first. She placed her hand firmly on the council table and stopped the document from being signed, her presence alone halting the motion of authority itself. The chamber went completely silent. No one spoke. No one corrected the moment. Even the air felt suspended, as if the institution itself was waiting to understand what this interruption would mean. Charles slowly lowered his hand, staring directly at Anne without speaking. There was no anger in his expression, only the weight of realization settling in uneven layers. Advisors avoided eye contact, each one understanding that witnessing this moment meant carrying it forward in silence long after the meeting ended. Anne did not withdraw her hand immediately. She held her position long enough for the meaning to fully land. But power inside the monarchy is never held by one moment alone. It is shaped by deeper forces, working quietly behind closed doors. Camilla felt the shift before anyone spoke. The silence after Anne's intervention still hung inside the palace like a held breath that no one dared release. Every advisor knew they had witnessed something that could not simply be filed away as disagreement. It had exposed pressure points beneath royal decision-making that normally stayed hidden behind procedure, tradition, and carefully controlled language. Charles moved through the aftermath with measured restraint, but his stillness carried weight. Internal reform committees had been reviewing Privy Council efficiency for months, driven by a belief that modernization was no longer optional. The Privy Council, the sovereign's formal advisory body that reviews and confirms decisions before they are finalized by the monarch, had become the center of that effort. It was framed as necessary for institutional longevity, a way to ensure the monarchy could adapt without losing authority. Yet now, that same structure felt exposed, as if its stability had been quietly tested without full acknowledgement. Anne stood apart from the movement of the room, aware that some advisors saw her as resisting unavoidable evolution, while others quietly feared she had been right to challenge what had been hidden inside procedural language. The tension was no longer about personality. It was about transparency. Those who supported reform believed change had been delayed too long. Those aligned with Anne believed speed had replaced scrutiny. Charles carried both pressures at once, believing progress would fail if every step required resistance before approval. The truth surfaced in fragments, not announcements. A confidential memo circulated after the chamber fell silent showed that final protocol language had been adjusted only hours before the meeting, without full council alignment. That detail changed everything. It meant the version presented for approval was not the same version previously reviewed by all advisory members. One senior clerk later admitted, in a recorded internal compliance conversation, that there was genuine concern over whether proper council review had been fully completed before the session began. The admission did not accuse anyone directly, but it widened the space between procedure and execution. Charles felt that gap immediately when the documents were brought back to him. He requested, without raising his voice, that all materials be returned to his private study. The request was not dramatic. It was final. Advisors understood the meaning instantly. The process was no longer moving forward. Not until clarity replaced uncertainty. What had been intended as a routine approval had become something far more sensitive and unresolved question of how decisions had been shaped before reaching the chamber at all. A senior aide stepped forward quietly, placing the revised protocol documents into a sealed folder without announcement. The gesture was controlled, almost ritualistic, as if containing something that could no longer remain in open view. Then the aide walked them out of the chamber without a single word of explanation, leaving behind only the absence of what had been removed. Inside a private room moments later, Charles sat alone with those withdrawn papers placed in front of him. He did not open them again. His attention stayed fixed, not on the text, but on what the absence of certainty now meant for every decision layered beneath it. The weight of leadership, usually shared through structured council, suddenly felt concentrated in one silent moment that no advisor could interrupt. And as the documents disappeared from the chamber, the consequences of that silence began to surface inside the palace corridors. Within minutes of the halted signing, the palace did not speak publicly, but inside its walls, everything shifted. Advisors moved faster, voices lowered, and corridors filled with controlled urgency. Princess Anne's intervention had not only paused a decision, it had forced the monarchy to confront an internal contradiction between modernization and constitutional restraint. And in that contradiction, emotional reactions began to surface in ways no protocol could contain. The Privy Council session, the sovereign's formal advisory meeting, where senior officials review and approve state decisions before final authorization, was immediately suspended, pending internal review. Charles ordered the pause without raising his voice, but the impact landed heavily across the room. The instruction was simple: nothing moves forward until clarity is restored. At the same time, palace communications teams were told to maintain absolute silence, ensuring no public framing of the interruption escaped before the institution understood what it had just witnessed. Two decisions in parallel, one outward silence, one inward chaos. Anne remained composed, but her stillness carried distance. She did not celebrate the halt. She did not soften it either. She stood in the aftermath of confrontation, knowing exactly what it had cost her position inside the chamber. Charles, meanwhile, carried himself with restraint that felt heavier than anger. The interruption did not just challenge the revision, it unsettled his belief that modernization could move without fracture. He saw necessity. She saw consequence. Neither stepped back from what they believed, and that made the silence between them even sharper than words. Inside the corridors, debate broke out in controlled whispers. Advisors questioned whether the protocol revision would be rewritten or withdrawn entirely, and for the first time, neither outcome felt impossible. The Privy Council itself, the structure responsible for shaping advisory consent before royal authorization, suddenly appeared less stable than it had hours earlier. A system built on predictable approval was now suspended inside uncertainty. Some believed Anne had protected institutional balance. Others believed she had forced delay on unavoidable reform. A senior aide left the chamber with visibly shaken composure, clutching internal documents that had been part of the halted approval cycle. That image moved faster than any official statement could. It confirmed what everyone already felt, but no one could say aloud. The decision was no longer procedural. It had become personal at the highest level of governance. Even silence now carried meaning inside the palace. Charles remained inside briefly after the session ended, then stepped away without explanation. He did not speak to advisors. He did not issue correction. He simply absorbed the weight of what had just unfolded and allowed the moment to settle without interruption. Around him, movement resumed, but it no longer felt coordinated. It felt reactive. Anne moved differently. She did not linger in the chamber. She walked alone into a side corridor, where the noise of the meeting faded behind her. The palace doors closed softly, but the sound carried finality. She exhaled slowly, not in relief, but in recognition of what could not be reversed. Then she turned toward the private royal corridor, already aware that what came next would not be handled in public procedure, but in direct confrontation behind closed doors. A young court aide watched her pass in silence, holding his breath longer than necessary. He had seen senior figures before, but never like this, never someone carrying authority and consequence in equal measure without speaking a word. In that moment, even experience felt small compared to what had just shifted. But the most decisive moment was still ahead. Not in public chambers, but in a private exchange no one else was allowed to witness. Behind closed doors, where protocol cannot soften language and no audience shapes behavior, the true weight of royal disagreement emerges. Princess Anne entered the private study, expecting resolution, but what followed was not negotiation. It was a moment of clarity between tradition and transformation, between two senior figures who understood that neither could fully retreat without consequence. In that silence, the monarchy's internal balance shifted in a way no council vote could reverse. Charles did not wait for ceremony or advisors to frame the moment. He requested the private review immediately after the council halt, cutting through all formal layers that normally surrounded royal decision-making. The meeting took place without advisors, without clerical presence, without the protective structure of institutional language. Only two voices were allowed to remain in the room, and that absence of witnesses made every word heavier than usual. The Privy Council, the sovereign's formal advisory body responsible for reviewing and confirming state decisions before final approval, was no longer present in form, but its consequences filled the space between them. Anne stepped in, knowing exactly why she had been called. Charles carried frustration beneath controlled restraint, not at her personally, but at what he saw as resistance slowing reform that he believed was necessary for institutional purposes. He believed the monarchy needed sharper structure, faster alignment, and fewer procedural delays. Anne saw something different entirely. She maintained firm belief that procedural integrity had been compromised, and that no reform, no matter how necessary, could bypass the safeguards that ensured legitimacy. That difference was no longer abstract. It was now personal, immediate, and unavoidable. The air between them tightened as words became sharper but quieter. Anne made it clear, without raising her voice, that she would continue opposing any protocol changes that did not pass through full council transparency. She did not frame it as defiance. She framed it as obligation. Charles listened, and in that listening, something shifted. He realized this was no longer a disagreement about process. It had become constitutional in principle. That realization changed the entire weight of the conversation. This was not about efficiency anymore. It was about authority itself. Anne placed the draft document on the table, its presence enough to anchor everything they had been circling around. She looked directly at Charles and spoke with calm certainty, stating that the council must be protected before it can be modernized. Not preserved out of fear, but safeguarded, so its authority could remain legitimate through change. The words landed without force, but they did not need force. They carried structure, and structure, in that moment, was more powerful than persuasion. Charles remained still as she finished. He did not interrupt. He did not immediately respond. And when Anne finally turned and left the room, he stayed seated longer than necessary, slowly turning the document face down, as if trying to separate emotion from implication. But nothing in that room could be separated anymore. Every line had already been drawn in silence. What neither of them knew yet was how quickly the outside world would begin reacting to what had just occurred behind those closed doors. Camilla felt the shift in the air long before the public understood it. The silence from the palace was never truly silent. It was controlled, deliberate, and now dangerously noticeable. By the time that silence leaked beyond the walls, the story had already changed shape. A Privy Council intervention involving Princess Anne was no longer an internal adjustment. It had become a national question about authority itself, about how far royal governance could stretch before it cracked under its own weight. Charles understood the weight of delayed communication immediately. Media outlets began reporting unusual pauses in Privy Council announcements, and that delay became its own story. The Privy Council, the sovereign's formal advisory body responsible for reviewing and confirming state decisions before final approval, was usually invisible to public attention. But now, its absence of updates became louder than any statement. Public speculation grew rapidly, filling every gap with interpretation, suspicion, and uncertainty about internal disagreements over royal administrative reform. Anne did not appear in public, but her presence dominated every conversation about restraint and responsibility. Supporters of tradition framed her intervention as a necessary safeguard, a moment where constitutional caution protected institutional balance. Reform advocates, however, questioned whether resistance was slowing essential modernization the monarchy could no longer avoid. Charles found himself at the center of both interpretations, aware that every decision inside the palace was now being filtered through competing public narratives he could no longer control. The first formal framing came without warning. A national broadcaster opened its evening segment with a controlled but sharp statement: "A constitutional pause inside the Crown's advisory structure has occurred." The phrase carried weight beyond its simplicity, signaling that the Privy Council system itself had been temporarily halted in process. It was not framed as conflict, but as interruption within governance. That distinction mattered, because it confirmed the situation was procedural at the highest level, not just interpersonal disagreement. At the same time, a widely circulated image emerged, showing closed palace gates with increased security presence, reinforcing the sense that something unresolved was still unfolding behind them. Charles received updates without reacting publicly, but internally the shift was already irreversible. Advisors prepared statements that were never immediately released, each version carefully shaped to avoid escalation. Anne remained silent, but her name anchored every discussion about legitimacy and oversight. The monarchy was now reacting not to the event itself, but to how the event was being interpreted outside its control. Then the moment outside the palace broke into physical reality. Crowds began forming at the gates of Buckingham Palace, waiting for clarification that did not come. They did not shout at first. They simply watched. That silence from the public mirrored the silence inside the palace, creating a strange reflection between institution and nation. Every minute that passed without confirmation increased pressure on communication teams, already instructed to hold back until internal clarity returned. Inside a newsroom, a television anchor suddenly paused mid-broadcast after receiving breaking confirmation that Privy Council proceedings had been suspended. The pause was brief, but it changed the tone of the entire broadcast. The anchor's expression shifted from structured delivery to controlled disbelief, signaling to viewers that what was unfolding could no longer be contained within normal political framing. The broadcast continued, but differently, slower, heavier, more uncertain. In a palace corridor far from cameras, a press officer stood completely still, staring at a ringing phone they had been explicitly instructed not to answer yet. Each ring felt heavier than the last, not because of urgency alone, but because of timing. One call could shift the narrative. One statement could define interpretation. And until that decision came, silence itself was the only instruction. But beyond headlines and speculation, the monarchy itself was preparing for the final interpretation of what this moment truly meant. Camilla felt the calm after the storm before anyone dared to name it. The palace had stopped reacting, but it had not stopped moving. In the aftermath of the Privy Council disruption, a rare kind of internal clarity began to form, not loud, not public, but deliberate and precise. Princess Anne's intervention was no longer being spoken of as resistance. It was being reframed inside quiet corridors as constitutional caution inside a system forced to evolve under pressure. Charles moved carefully through the silence that followed. The protocol revision was formally paused pending comprehensive council review, a structured reassessment process designed to ensure full advisory transparency before any further approval. The Privy Council, the sovereign's formal advisory body responsible for reviewing and confirming state decisions before final authorization, had not been weakened, but paused mid-motion, as if the entire system had been asked to breathe before continuing. That pause changed everything about how authority now had to be handled. Anne did not present victory. She never framed it that way. She remained steady in her position, that oversight must never be bypassed, even in the name of efficiency or modernization. Charles, in turn, acknowledged something difficult but necessary. Reform that moves too fast risks breaking the trust it is meant to preserve. That recognition did not erase disagreement, but it softened the edges of it. For the first time, both stood inside the same problem, rather than on opposite sides of it. The shift did not arrive with announcement. It arrived with agreement, forming in silence. Internal consensus gradually moved toward revising, not rejecting, the proposed changes. That distinction mattered deeply. It meant the system was not collapsing under conflict, it was adjusting under scrutiny. Advisors concluded that council authority had been reaffirmed rather than diminished, a quiet but significant correction in how the monarchy interpreted what had just happened. What began as tension now turned into structure again, but this time with clearer boundaries. A new council framework meeting was scheduled under joint oversight, designed not to erase reform, but to rebuild it with full transparency from the beginning. That decision carried weight beyond procedure. It marked a shift from unilateral adjustment to shared architectural responsibility, where both tradition and modernization would need to exist in deliberate balance rather than silent tension. In a follow-up meeting that followed days later, Princess Anne and King Charles exchanged a quiet, measured nod. No conflict remained in that moment, no visible resistance, only recognition that the institution had reached a point where neither side could dominate the future without the other. It was not agreement in full, it was alignment in necessity. Anne sat alone afterward, finally releasing a breath she had held since the initial council session. That breath carried more than relief. It carried release of tension that had defined every decision leading to that moment. Charles, elsewhere in the palace, remained reflective but steadier, aware that control had not been lost but reshaped. This moment defined not division within the monarchy, but its resilience under internal pressure. It proved that even within reform, boundaries still exist not to resist change, but to ensure it carries legitimacy. And in that balance between change and continuity, the monarchy did not break, it recalibrated itself for what comes next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.